Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined in the studio by Natasha Meikle. Natasha, welcome to the studio. How are you?
Great, it's nice to be here as always. Nice to make the trip in.
It's good that we're getting back to some form of normality.
Yes.
And being in the studio, it doesn't change the narrative. There's plenty to discuss. And we will start off with the incoming manager. And Ange Postecoglou has agreed terms. The compensation has been agreed. And it looks as though he will be in place for the training camp in Wales. Now, the question is, with the player exodus and the major fan unrest, which we'll talk about individually, can he handle it? How will he handle it? Is he able to handle it?
Well, he simply has to. I mean, that's the bottom line. He has to, preparing us for the majority of the Champions League qualifiers, and hopefully Postecoglou will be able to pick up in Wales. It's going to be difficult. Let's, not make any excuses here. It's going to be a very difficult task for Postecoglou. Something that we've picked up on the banner at the bottom is this mass player exodus. So not only has Postecoglou got to come in, assess the squad, work out what he needs, bring new players in, bed that all together. That is a big project if you're losing one or two players. It's an even bigger project if you're going to lose the amount of players that we are, and it becomes an impossible project when you look at the timescales we've got to do it in. So it's a massive task ahead of him, but I'm sure that he knows that. I'm sure that the situation he is fully aware of, so he knows what he's got to do here. My concern is simply the time he's got to do it in, and a further concern, obviously, being that we're going to find ourselves in the position of going into Champions League qualifiers unprepared. And how many seasons do we have to say that before we learn from it?
I made a joke a few months ago, Natasha, saying that we'll go into the qualifiers with near beat on at centre half again. And actually, it looks very likely. And we'll talk about things like the squad management, the outgoing players that Ange won't have at his disposal. And that includes players such as Jack Hendry and the bad business all around that, because I think it is pretty bad business by the club. There's reports ongoing in the mainstream media today about the arrival of Postecoglou. It's one of these things that I think after the initial kind of surprise and disappointment of Eddie Howe's deal breaking down, this name came to the fore and was met with a bit of derision, just not only on Axon, but when you're trying to gauge it on social media. There was a lot of Celtic fans unhappy with it. You then do a bit of backtracking, I think, Natasha, and you start looking into the man's makeup and his philosophy around football. So and I'm going to bring up a long-time viewer, John Paul Connors, welcome to the show. Nice positive headline for the Bulletin. I'll tell you what, John Paul, I think we need a headline writer to try and get a wee bit more positivity into these headlines. But the question really is, how will he, not can he? Because going by everything I've read and the podcasts I've watched and the videos that I've watched, it sounds as though he certainly will be able to handle himself. But how will he handle himself? It's such a major revamp of the personnel. Starting off, let's say, with that defence. Now, as we look at the Celtic squad, it's been confirmed by the player himself that Ajer will be leaving. He's one that myself, Natasha, has always kind of supported. I actually touted him for the next captain, and a lot of people disagree with that, and that's fine. And I can see that there's plenty for him to improve on, especially from a defensive perspective. But it looks as though he's going to be leaving. Jack Hendry has left. We'll focus on that a wee bit more. Looks as though he's leaving, rather, which would leave us with a defence of Ralston at right back. And again, can someone give me the status of Ralston, because I know he's still under contract, but I heard elsewhere that he has been paid up and has left the building. If that's the case, it's Leo Connor, who's been out on loan at Tranmere Rovers. At left back, you've got Greg Taylor, who's obviously with the Euro squad just now, and his backup is either Bolingoli or Leo Held, who's only 17 years of age. And then your centre halves. So Julian, injured until September, October time. Welsh, who I think came in at the worst possible time for a youngster, but he did pretty well. And then you're looking at players like Near Beaton, who, again, is a converted midfield player who's played quite a bit of football at centre-back for Celtic. Now, I think if you just look at the defence, Natasha, that shows you the scale of the job that Ange Postecoglou has in front of him. And I know that we've been linked to so many players over the last couple of weeks. It's quite clear he's not had any part to play in that. Some people thought Eddie Howe had something to do with some of the incomings and outgoings. The club are trying, obviously, to try and get some deals over the line. But this is getting to the kind of desperate stage when you look at that defence and how thin it is.
If that is the defence for the start of the Champions League qualifiers, then that shows how far we've fallen, that is the sort of lineup and the only lineup that we can go out there with. I mean, where do you start with that? How have we got ourselves into the position that is a serious possibility? It's something that a few months ago we almost joked about. Like, imagine if that's the position we find ourselves in. If we're not careful, that's the position we'll find ourselves in. Now with these qualifiers so close, it literally is the position we found ourselves in, and that's just through bad business planning. No business, whether it's football or otherwise, should find themselves in the position that their almost worst case scenario is realised. You have to have better forward planning with that, and they haven't. We'll talk. We can talk about the players individually. Ayer, he said that he wanted to go last season. We obviously persuaded him to stay in an attempt for 10 in a row. That didn't happen. But we then knew that we'd have to make good on that promise. We knew the club must have absolutely known that Ayer was going to leave this year, so that we had to find a replacement. That doesn't appear to have happened. Julian, we know, has been injured for a while now. That's not a new injury. That's someone we know is long-term injured, someone we should have backup for. Again, it doesn't look like it's happened yet. Stephen Welsh was thrown into the deep end last year, and while I don't have a bad word to say against him, that was a massive ask to put him into that position last year, and one that was probably a few steps too far ahead of him, and we asked him to make that jump. He did it well, but it's still asking a lot for him. Greg Taylor at left back, Anthony Ralston at right back, they are weak links. Celtic struggle with full-backs. We struggle with balls into the box. We struggle with cross balls. Those struggles are only going to intensify if those are our full-backs. Now, so we found ourselves in this position, and I say that, it's not been fixed. We've not replaced Ayer, we've not replaced Julian. Maybe I'm giving the club too much credit, but maybe there are targets lined up. Maybe there are players that have been identified that are going to come in, maybe not in time for the Champions League qualifiers, but maybe there are targets lined up that we're going to move on. That's fine on one hand, but then the other concern comes in, well, whose targets are they? We've no manager in place. We thought Eddie Howe might have been having a helping hand. That's clearly not the case. Postecoglou, I don't think, will be in a position to start to be identifying players yet. So if we do have targets lined up, if we do have replacements for these players identified, whose are they? Are they Peter Lawwell's? He shouldn't be having a hand in this sort of football operations. So are they John Kennedy's? Are they Gavin Strachan's? And if that's the case, are those the sort of players we want? What if Postecoglou doesn't agree with that? So there's two bad case scenarios here. On one hand, we've no transfer targets identified, and we're going to go into the qualifiers and probably the start of the season unprepared. And on the other hand, we do have targets identified, but they've been identified by people we might not want to be doing the identifying. So I hate to present two bad case scenarios, but if someone can present a good case scenario here to me, then I am all ears.
I think back, Natasha, to football as I knew it, and I know that everything needs to evolve when we're in the modern age, but it used to be the case that would never happen. The manager would have a say or identify himself in the players that are coming in, and I think that it's become clear to most Celtic fans that we have had a situation at the club where that's not been the case. I mean, I remember being shown fairly recently the press around Peter Lawwell coming in. First, when he was actually named as the CEO, and his job entailed non-footballing matters. At some point over the period that he's been at the club, he definitely has interfered or been involved in the comings and goings at Celtic Park. There's been players who have been sold who didn't want to leave. There's been players who's come in that the gaffers didn't actually want. And I think, you can look at some of the examples, and I remember the example that Gordon Strachan gives is that he turned up at training and Paddy McCourt was there, and he didn't know who Paddy McCourt was, and he didn't know if he was on trial or if he was, being brought into he actually didn't know that player, and he definitely didn't have a part to play in bringing him in. And you know, that worked out okay because Paddy's a cult icon, and don't sell McCourt and everything else. We could have a wee sing-song. But then you look at some of the bad examples of it. Marvin Compere, £1.5 million plus whatever wages for 60 minutes of football. Now, when you're winning leagues and trebles, as we were at that time, yeah, it's not a big deal. I don't think anyone was too concerned about it because we were, domestically at least, so strong that, you know, a £1.5 million punt was worthwhile, and the gaffer didn't fancy him and didn't play him. But it goes on and on and on. There's so many examples of that. And then again, it encroaches the manager's say-so when the manager quite clearly wants a player and we don't get him. And I'm going to try and be fair, I guess, to Neil Lennon, who we'll come back to, because I don't think you've had a chance to speak about Lenny on Axon. You know, there were certainly players that Neil Lennon wanted at Celtic this season, or for this season, that we didn't get. And then, but the flip side to that argument, I would suggest, is that he was given players that he should have been able to get a tune out of, and he didn't. Some of them, you know, I don't think any manager would have because of the circumstances, and I'm going to use Shane Duffy in that because I think that his personal circumstances played into the poor performances that we saw. And of course, we wish him all the best. But other ones, when you're presented with an international goalkeeper with Champions League experience, you think that you would be able to manage that player. Albion Ayeti, again, people might be thinking that this is a nonsense, but I think he showed enough in his first half a dozen games that, you know, we could manage that player and maybe set the team up that's, you know, in a way that suited him rather than playing just, you know, one lone striker a lot of the time. So when we're looking at the structure of the club, this is going to feed in not only to the new managerial appointment but also to the incoming Dominic Mackay, and we'll talk about that as well. But when you think about the actual the announcement and the statement that was made around a restructuring of Celtic, a big part of that restructuring, I would have thought, was the way we did business. So when the new CEO comes in, you would expect him to be dealing with all non-football matters. At the moment, we don't have a head of recruitment because Nicky Hammond's left the building. We don't have a manager. So the question you raise is a valid one. Who is doing the deals at the moment? What if Ange Postecoglou, if he had done a pre-season with Jack Kendry, or if he had done a pre-season with Chris Ayer, or even Odsonne Edouard, and I think we're all kind of resigned to losing Eddie anyway. Who would have said that Ange wouldn't have said, you know, instead of me going out and trying to source a centre-half, I want to keep Chris Ayer. Do what you can to keep Chris Ayer for at least another season. Or even the Jack Kendry dilemma, get him in, let's have a look at him. What's going to happen if Jack Kendry goes out there and plays out his skin for Scotland and Scotland have a good tournament? I mean, I think that we're going to bring in about 1.8 million quid for Jack Kendry. Ostend are already looking at selling him on, Natasha. Now, if they do that, and some of the figures I've seen have been incredible. I've seen figures of 10 million quid, right? And that's what happens when an English club or English clubs are interested in the player. So you're looking at interest from West Brom, Burnley, and there's a third club, Leeds United, who are interested in Hendry. If he has a brilliant tournament in the Euros, and particularly if he plays well against England. Now, by the way, I appreciate that this wee section could be clipped and used in my defence or against me at a future date. And he has a great tournament and he's sold for about 10 million quid. That is bad business. And I think that, you know, Celtic fans are already looking at this situation, again, in advance, saying this is bad, this is going to be a bad move. But the guys, the decision makers at the club are allowing it to happen. That doesn't fill me with much confidence at all, Natasha, looking into the future. Yeah, no, I agree. What I will say is that this is looking like some very, very good business for Ostend. If they've managed to get that player on loan who is went to, you know, a very good quality of league and is getting spoken about as one of the best defenders in that league, they've had him on loan, they're going to get to buy him for very cheap deal considering how he's been playing over there, 1.5, 1.7 million, something in that region. And then they could sell him on again before the season even starts. So this is a player that they've had on loan for a year that they're then going to get a massive profit on for owning him for probably a matter of weeks if he ends up going to one of these big English clubs. And quite rightly, that's a great bit of business for them. But what it really is a terrible bit of business for Celtic. And again, it's that lack of foresight that we weren't able to think long term.
that we didn't properly assess Jack Henry, perhaps, that we wrote him off by allowing this clause in his contract to allow us then to have this option to buy. We obviously didn't see the potential that player had. He, let's be honest, the Celtic fans equally saw no potential in Jack Henry when he played for us. The few appearances he did make, the Celtic fans all wrote him off as well, and I'm not excluding myself from that. We didn't think he was up to it. We didn't think he was good enough. He has went away to Belgium and shown that he does have that ability, and he might show it again during the Euros. So what was it about his time at Celtic that made a good player look so bad? Because something was wrong. Was it the coaching? Was it the style of play? Was it the pressure of Glasgow? Was it the pressure of winning? Was that not suitable for Jack Henry as a player? Maybe that is the case. But something I'm concerned about this season, like we've seen, is that we have managed to make a lot of good players look very bad. Diego Laxalt, look at his history, look at his World Cup, look at the club he played for, look at the values he's been transferred for. He's not a bad player. When he first came in, he didn't look like a bad player. He almost regressed by playing within that team. Elyounoussi is not a bad player. There's a lot of quality in a player like Elyounoussi, and you saw glimpses of it, but far too often he didn't look like a great player. He didn't look like a player worth the money that was being talked about around him. Barkas, he's a £5 million internationalist goalkeeper. He came in and looked like a bad player. So there was something fundamentally wrong within the setup, within the squad, within the management team, that were making too many good players look like really bad players. The unfortunate thing is that perhaps a new management team could change that. Perhaps a new setup could change that and get a better tune out of these players, out of players that were even on loan, the Laxalts, the Elyounoussis. The frustrating thing is that it's unlikely we're going to get to see that.
I know.
Because we're not going to bring these players back by the looks of it.
It is frustrating because you did get glimpses, particularly I think of Elyounoussi. What I think it comes down to, Natasha, right, is we're going to speak about some of the specifics, but I just think it comes down to leadership. So if we go back, a lot of people say, right, you're not looking back far enough. You've got to go back to the Brendan Rodgers era where it started breaking down there, which it did. And obviously Brendan Rodgers is the man that's coming in for Edouard by all accounts. So you look at the situation with Brendan Rodgers where there's a clash. And I'm not going to call it a clash of egos, but there's definitely a clash between Brendan Rodgers and Peter Lawwell. And there's a breakdown of that relationship. So that comes down to leadership. So if you're a leader in this business, which is modern football, and you're a leader at a club like Celtic, and you can see the benefit of having someone like Brendan Rodgers at that club, then as a leader, you need to give him some kind of capacity to get on with his job. You can't be overbearing. You can't be presenting him with players such as Marian Sved, if you go back to that infamous interview that Rodgers gave, which quite clearly showed he had nothing to do with the boy Sved coming in. And your leadership should allow you to give him the freedom to do his job, because let's be honest, he was doing it pretty well. So I think that's where the rot starts. It starts when Brendan Rodgers is at the club. Then there's a lack of leadership in bringing in his successor. So we've seen the league table of world record management fees, and Brendan Rodgers I think is number 3. Celtic to Leicester, 9 point something million. And what did we follow that up with? So that's like, selling Moussa Dembele for 20 million and replacing him with Bayo. So Rodgers goes out the building, we bring in Neil Lennon. Now, this isn't an excuse or an opportunity for me to Lenny bash, because we'll be talking about Lennon's comments at some point anyway, Natasha, but there's no way he was on the same managerial level as Brendan Rodgers. Nowhere near it. Not even in the same ballpark at that particular time. And I always ask when people argue with me about that, what did he do from the time that he left Celtic to the time that he returned that would legislate that move? Did he do anything? Did he do enough at Bolton or Hibs that would suggest that he was a good enough permanent replacement for Brendan Rodgers? I mean, I can see the reason for bringing him in on an interim basis. I can see that. But actually, with hindsight, which is a great thing, you've got to look at the fact that he's maybe come in and there's been a galvanising of the squad at that point. But the big decision was at the end of that season. We've gone over that. But again, let's go back to the leadership or lack of. So that leadership has been an issue. And again, once we speak about the Neil Lennon interview where he's gone on about the season where he beat Lazio and he won a treble, etc., that's fine. But there's obviously been a long process of time where players have felt, Ayer and Edouard included, probably Christie, that they're going to play up to a certain point and then the club's going to let them go. The club have then convinced them to stay. That's coming out in dribs and drabs now, Natasha. I mean, we were talking about it because that's, curiously what Celtic fans want to do. They want to figure out what's the problem here. Does he want to be at the club? And people looked at Edouard's performances. On paper, and I'm sure his showreel's pretty good when he's dinking balls in against AC Milan. It looks as though he's had a decent enough season. But when you watch Edouard, it's not been his best season. We know he can do better. His performances have dipped. But it's a lack of leadership to keep those players at the club. However, can you imagine the outcry? Imagine Axom back in August if, we had the treble whammy of Ayer and Edouard and Christie. At that time, probably all at their peak in terms of value being sold. So on the one hand, I'm critical of it. On the other hand, I can see why they did it. But then if you're the manager, you're the leader of the football department and you're told, right, you're going to have to run with Edouard, Christie and Ayer this season. How can that be turned into a negative? Well, Neil Lennon turned it into a negative. Somehow he did, because of all those players, the one that I think you can criticise him for his performances, but you can't criticise him for his dedication to the cause is Chris Ayer, because at no point did he give anything less than 100%. And I think that's probably why I was saying that he's captain material. I see him as a leader. I know that there's frailties defensively. I still think that he's young enough to learn to improve his game. But this always comes back to leadership. There was a lack of leadership. So if you're bringing these new players in, Natasha, and we've mentioned, El Yunusi knew the club pretty well anyway, but Barkas coming in and others, Ayeti, they're coming in. If they're coming into this basket case of a club, then the culture at the club emanates from the leadership. So it comes from the head honchos at the club, it comes from the heads of the football department. So instead of all this blame game, and we'll get to Neil Lennon's interview, it's all about the leaders for me and lack of leadership. And I still think at this moment in time, the big grey area is the fact that we've got two CEOs in the building. One of them is the current CEO. The other one, I don't think, can really influence decisions at the moment, because until the 1st of July, he is just coming in early, but he's not in the role. And I actually have a degree of sympathy for Dominic Mackay in the fact that his face appeared on that banner yesterday online. So let's talk about the leadership. It seems as though we're still a rudderless ship at the moment, Natasha.
I mean, it looks a bit like it. I know, obviously, on Friday there were a lot of rumours that Lawwell has left early. There's rumours that Friday was his last day and he's gone. I don't know if that's true.
Were you invited for a bit of the leaving cake?
I don't think that invite's coming our way anytime soon, but we shall see. Maybe Dominic Mackay might be more inclined to extend the invite. But I think if Lawwell had left on Friday, I think Celtic would have said something. I think there would have been some communication, and maybe I'm doing them too much credit here, but I think there would have been some communication that he had left and Mackay was now in charge. Because I agree with you, if you're coming in as Mackay has, he's coming early, not to do the job, but to shadow. He's come in to learn a bit about the club, to watch how things are done, to take notes. It's essentially someone sitting in on a business meeting, but they're not at the table. They're sitting, a row behind the table, taking notes of the meeting and learning from it. Experience. The person who's sitting behind the table where the decisions are made, who doesn't have a seat at the table yet, isn't going to jump in and start suggesting things when things are being talked about. He's going to take notes, he's going to wait for his time when he's in charge and then implement things based on the experience he's gained by shadowing for these couple of months. It's unfair, I think, to expect Mackay to have come in and made wholesale changes when he's not actually in the job yet. When he's in the job, absolutely, it's his role and he takes the plaudits and the criticism when it's his role and when he is the one in charge. Right now, he's not that guy. Right now, he's simply there in an experienced capacity. One thing I would say, though, is that, when Celtic talked about, when they tried to give us this communication about the managerial search that was ongoing a couple of months back, probably now, something they said is, in terms of the managerial search, the people who were doing that were Lawwell and Mackay. So Mackay is involved. So he is involved in this hunt for the next manager, which makes you think that he was involved in the negotiations with Howe that ultimately, as we know, broke down. So if we're looking at what the Green Brigade did in terms of that banner and having Mackay's face on it, from their perspective, what they're going to say is, they're complaining about the fact that we're now 104 days without a manager. Mackay, according to Celtic, is part of the team who was looking for a new manager, who was engaging in the negotiations and who was trying to bring someone in. So he's essentially part of the team that have failed to do that. Now, in saying that, I think we have to cut him some slack. He is not in charge here. Lawwell's in charge here. Once he takes over, yes, it's his role and the criticism can fall on him. But until that time, I do think we need to give him a bit more of a chance here. Let him get his feet under the table and let's see how he's going to take the club forward. Because until then, until we've seen him, his philosophies, what he's going to do, then we can't criticise too much.
You know, when we look at the whole managerial situation, and the podcast is a great way of looking back and saying to yourself, I was talking a whole lot of nonsense that day, or otherwise. Every now and again, there's a little nugget of information that you think, oh, right enough, I did call that a wee while back, but nobody uses them as memes, unfortunately. But when we're talking about the managerial situation, I think what's happened is this is all predated, obviously, Dominic Mackay coming in even early. And what we do know is that Eddie Howe was obviously prime candidate, and we've gone right down to the wire on the Eddie Howe deal, and it's broken up. Whilst we've been on the Eddie Howe deal, we have allowed the Maresca/Harkin deal to fall by the wayside, probably because we're putting all the eggs in the basket of Eddie Howe. And the third one that we know has definitely resulted in discussions was the Roy Keane and Nicky Butt partnership, both of whom were interviewed by Celtic. The Nicky Butt interview indeed was Peter Lawwell that did that. So again, that's probably predating Dominic Mackay coming to the club. The fourth one, and Russell reminded me, so cheers for this, Russell, if you're listening. Boyce reminded me that I said there was a fourth candidate that has not yet been named. And I had my idea, and it certainly, I didn't think for a moment it was Ange Postecoglou. I thought that there was a fourth candidate. So it would appear that if that was the case, and it was Postecoglou, as it probably was, this is something that's happened several months ago, and it's predated Dominic Mackay coming in. But it's a difficult scenario between now and the end of the month where we need to get somebody in because the dates are against us, and that person that comes in could well have been identified by the guys that are on their way out, even though Dominic Mackay's coming in at the kind of latter stages to get the deal across the line. So I do have a great deal of sympathy for anyone coming into that scenario, but like you rightly say, 6 months down the line, nobody's going to say, yeah, but that was Peter Lawwell, because the flag is going to go to those in charge of the club. So it's a big risk, I think, from Celtic's perspective. And I listened with interest, and I've got to say, I do quite like Gordon Strachan, right? I know I don't agree with everything he says, but I like listening to him. He's one of these guys, he's good to listen to.
Yeah, totally.
He's got an opinion, he sticks to it. Sometimes the opinions are left field. But he says that Celtic fans should be excited by the arrival of Ange Postecoglou. Does he excite you, Natasha?
Do you know what? I can get on board with it. I can. I think once you get over the initial disappointment of losing out on Howe, I think what happened is that Celtic fans thought that Howe was out with our reach, that we couldn't get a manager of that stature. And then all of a sudden it started to creep in that we could, and then it became a done deal. Howe was going to be the next manager, so excitement level was up here. When that falls, you don't just go back to where you were, you go even further because of that expectation. And then, to compound that, they bring out a name most people haven't heard of. So you go down even further. So that's where the fans' position was when they were starting to consider Postecoglou. Now, the more we hear about him, the more we research him, the more we learn about them, the more we listen about him, the more excited I get. Because I'll be honest, and I think the majority of Celtic fans are likely to agree with me on this, I didn't know a great deal about Ange Postecoglou. I did not know a great deal about the A-League and the J-League. The one thing that has been mentioned a lot, which I think I agree with, is that we were almost, and I include myself in this, at the start when we knew his managerial record, ignorant of disregarding those leagues. The A-League, the J-League, we talked them down. And it's been compared to the same way that other leagues do to us. Oh, that's the Scottish League, Tin Pot League, Farmers League, whatever they want to call it. I think at the start, because of the lack of awareness around them, the lack of knowledge around them, we taught those leagues down. And then, like we did when we got Jared on from Celtic Down Under to come and talk to us about him, and the more I read about him, the more I learned about the A-League and the J-League as we go and do our homework on this, the more excited I did start to get about Postecoglou. I'm not saying he's my first choice, I'm not saying he's in my top 5, but I can start to get on board with this. And I think one thing we have to do is listen to the people who are more informed in this than I am. So like people like Jared, like my friends who watch the A-League and the J-League who live in Australia, listen to them. Listen to what they've got to say about those leagues, this manager. And that does start to excite me more because they know more about him than I do. And if they think that he's a good appointment, then that starts to excite me a little more. It does. If they talk up him as a person, his philosophies, his character, the way he plays football, that begins to excite me and it begins to show some sort of potential. And I've seen the comments that, well, of course, people like Jared are going to talk up another Australian. Of course, Australian journalists are going to talk up another Australian. I don't think that's too true, to be honest. I think as a Celtic fan, first and foremost, you want the best person for your club. So, you know, Jared, yes, he's Australian, but he's a Celtic fan. My friend Dan, who lives in Australia, who's been talking to me a lot about Ange, he's Australian. First and foremost, he's a Celtic fan as well, though. He's not going to advocate someone to the club just because they're Australian, in the same way that we're not going to sit here and think it has to be a Scottish manager, it has to be an Irish manager. We've moved beyond that, and I think it's a bit unfair to suggest that Australians are talking up Ange because he's Australian if they're Celtic fans as well. Jared said himself that Ange wouldn't be his first choice either and gave examples of who he would choose. One thing that interested me about Postecoglou that's actually has been getting talked down a bit is his, youth development angle. We know going into a rebuild that one of the key strands for Celtic going forward is going to be bringing on our youth players, and it's something that's been really criticised recently, is that it's something we're not excelling in. Looking at our youth academy, look at the young boys we're bringing through is a bit of a worry. Ange obviously started before he managed the Australian first team, he was in charge of the Australian under-17s and under-20s for 4 campaigns. And he got them through those qualifiers every time until Oceania switched to Asia. And that's when he started coming into more difficulty. They started then playing in a really difficult league, and that's what's honed in on. And I think it was something that was discussed yesterday. But his track record with those young Australian teams is very, very good. The players he brought through those young Australian squads into the first team squad is brilliant when you look at it. And you only have to look as far as Scott McDonald. He's one player that Ange had at youth level in Australia, developed through the systems, got into the Australian first team. So one thing that Australians do talk up about Postecoglou is the way that he developed these young under-17, under-20 Australian sides before then taking over as first team manager and continuing there. So if that's maybe something has not been spoken about enough, is that he's also got this string to his bow in terms of youth development. So the more I read about him, to go back to the original question, the more I read about him, the more excited I do get, and I am willing to give him a chance. And I think that that's something that Celtic fans will do. They will give him a chance. Of course, the minute whoever is in the door, we will all get behind them. But is it a risk-free appointment? It's not, and we can talk at length about that as well. It's not a risk-free appointment, and you do have to wonder how we got to this position.
How indeed. Now, loads of comments coming through, Natasha. Dominic Duras is commenting on YouTube. Welcome to the show. Has Ange been made the next manager? Well, at the moment, the situation is we've agreed a compensation package with his team. He's agreed personal terms of his agreement have been ironed out, and we are now waiting on the UEFA exemption, which is obviously underway. When that news broke, they said that it would take several weeks, but the reports today that are running are that he will take part in the training session on the 5th of July, training camp in Wales. Now, that was quite surprising, because I was saying the other day that I can see a situation where Kennedy's having to get this squad together. Now, again, I know he's had lots of criticism, Natasha, but John Kennedy is in a bit of no man's land as well, isn't he?
Do you know, I might get pelters for this. I almost feel for John Kennedy, I do. because he was left in a terrible position when Neil Lennon left and he had to stay and steer this ship home when it was in absolute disarray. He now must know that the fans do not want him in charge of the team. I think that's very clear. He knows that. But he's now finding himself in the position that there could be no other option. He has to stay, because if he doesn't, Postecoglou isn't ready to come in. Somebody needs to be there to welcome the team back for pre-season training, and it's got to be Kennedy. And you know what? Part of me thinks, maybe Kennedy doesn't want this. He knows that he isn't isn't anyway wanted as the manager of the club, but there is no one else around right now because of the hierarchy, because of the board, because of the fact that we've been unable to bring a permanent manager in before now. We've left John Kennedy in an unenviable position where he isn't wanted for the job, but is going to have to do it anyway. So, and it's not even, a small task that we're giving him. We're asking him to prepare half a squad going through turmoil for important Champions League qualifiers. That's a big ask for him, and I do feel sorry for him in a way. I think that, it's very difficult. It's very easy to criticise him. He was part of that setup under Neil Lennon. He was on the training ground every day. He failed to get the team to perform as much as Lennon did. That blame and that culpability has to fall on his shoulders and Strachan's shoulders as much as it does Lennon's, because they were the ones out in the training pitch every day. It didn't work. When Kennedy took over for those 10 games, what was it, 4 wins, 4 draws, 2 losses?
Yeah. 3 games against Rangers. He's got the opportunity there. He's got a semi-final. He's got an opportunity.
That, for me, those 10 games was essentially a failed edition. And the worst part of it for me was that he failed to stamp his own identity on it. He failed to do anything. He failed to show us what he could bring to the role if he ever did it. And I think the fans would have had more respect if Kennedy had come in and almost ripped things up and started again. Let's have a look at changing the formation. Let's have a look at bringing the fringe players in. Let's have a look at bringing the youth players in. All he did was the tried and tested formula that didn't work, playing players who we know won't be here next season in games that meant essentially nothing. That was the biggest disappointment with Kennedy for me, and that's why a lot of fans think that he should be nowhere near this rebuild. How can you rebuild using the people who caused the damage necessitating the rebuild, if you know what I mean here? We can't move forward when we're clinging on to the people who were part of last season's disaster. And saying that, I come back to the point I just made. Who else is going to do it though? What, are we going to get rid of Kennedy now? Are we going to get rid of Strachan now? Who's going to welcome the players back from pre-season? Are we going to put McManus and O'Day in charge? We can't fall to that either. So I think for that reason, for lack of personnel, for lack of anyone else around, the situation we found ourselves in is that we have no option but to let Kennedy and Strachan continue and prepare us for the Champions League qualifiers.
You're right. I mean, I'm thinking of the 10 games. I'm thinking of anything bold. I don't think there was anything bold. I think the only player that he reintroduced was maybe Dembele. Came in for a couple of cameos, scored a goal. You're then thinking, well, we were kind of struggling for width all season. Why didn't we bring him in before? The other player I was disappointed that we didn't see a wee bit more of, and people might be yawning and rolling their eyes here, but Ryan McGinley comes in to mention Lee Griffiths and saying that his brother's confirmed that he's a free agent. Well, his contract certainly was up on the 31st in May, and he will be a fantastic signing on a free transfer for anybody, as a free agent rather, for anybody coming in the Scottish top division. I reckon he could go to Hibs or Aberdeen or Dundee United and become a star and score plenty of goals. But again, I think that the situation with John Kennedy is he didn't even mix it up front. Now, with Lee Griffiths leaving, where does that leave us? There's strong indications coming through today and over the last couple of weeks that Edouard's on his way, obviously. They're talking of £18 million to Leicester. If that happens, we are left with Albion Ayeti, the aforementioned, who at the moment I don't think has convinced anyone that he's going to be a star at Celtic, but certain managers can get things out of certain players, Natasha. Who knows if he's the guy that's going to react to Postecoglou's arrival. And his only backup at the moment, although I don't think he's returned from his loan yet, is Bio. So at the moment, that's all we have up front. So we've already spoken about the wafer-thin nature of the defence. We're the same up front at the moment. We've only got 2 strikers. You're then probably having to dip into the coach team, but let's not forget there will be a coach team. So we're going to need some of that personnel who might have been on the fringes, the younger players, for the second team who are going to be playing in the league pyramid. So loads and loads for the new gaffer to contend with. Do you think Celtic supporters, here's one for you, would have been happier with Postecoglou or Kennedy?
Postecoglou, I have to say. I think that for too many, Kennedy is too ingrained and too associated with last season's disaster. Like I've just touched on, he is culpable for last season not being able to get a tune out of that team. So I think that the majority of people, and myself included, want a change. We need something fresh. If we're talking about a rebuild, a cultural change, we need someone fresh. That's not John Kennedy. Is Kennedy a good coach? Do you know what? He probably is. We've heard from a lot of good managers. We'll talk about Brendan Rodgers, who talk up how good a coach Kennedy is. Everybody who has trained under him, worked with him, people like Damien Duff, players like Scott Brown, experience there, who all go on about how good a coach Kennedy is. And I don't doubt that he is. But he's not Celtic first team manager level, not yet. Is Postecoglou? We'll find out. I hope so. I certainly hope so. But for me, I think if you are trying to move away from last season, if you are trying to rebuild, then we need not to have John Kennedy as our manager for next season. Yes, people don't know a lot about Postecoglou, but I think the overarching opinion would be that let's give him a try before Kennedy.
One of the terms used by Jared last week, which I found quite interesting because you start looking at yourself, I guess, is Euro snobbery. Remember he was talking about the Euro snobs. And you look at someone like Postecoglou, age 55, this isn't me being ageist in any way, shape or form, but with 25 years coaching managerial experience, the question might be, why is nobody taking this plunge before now?
It's a very good question, and one that keeps cropping up. And maybe it is this Euro snobbery that we talk about. Maybe it is for the same reason that we don't tap into these markets regularly, is that we look down on them and we don't think they're at our level. But in saying that, I heard a rumour, over the last couple of days that apparently AEK Athens were also looking at Postecoglou. Right. Apparently he was on their radar as a potential option.
They could have signed Barkas back.
Then we would have been grateful to him, I'm sure. But so maybe he has been on the brink of one of these appointments, and something that, again, talking to my friends in Australia, they think that he has constantly been on the brink of one of these appointments. They think it's just been about timing, and that at some point it was inevitable that a European team were going to take a punt on this guy, and that Celtic are the first ones that are going to do it. And that could go one way or the other. By this time next year we could be praising the innovation of looking at a market that we don't usually go to and thinking outside the box and finding this untapped resource in terms of the market and really finding something there in terms of managerial ability. Or by this time next year we could be looking at it and saying, well, there's a reason we don't go to leagues like that. But for me, I'm hopeful. I'm probably coming down on the side of the former. I think it is just a case of it's something that's untapped yet. If we're going to be the first ones to sort of test those waters, then great, let's do it. I think it's a good route to go down. No, obviously I'm still concerned. There's obviously still risks. No appointment comes without risks. But overall, I think I'm getting on the Postecoglou bus, as Russell would say, despite the fact he is not leading the bus himself.
Is Boyce driving it? That's the question.
I don't think he is.
A couple of things before we move on to the Dominic Mackay question around, obviously, yesterday's banner, etc. Now, I'm looking at one of the biggest concerns, and it's a concern I've certainly got, is the backroom team, and it's something that Neil Lennon has spoken about as well, with certain coaches and assistants and being foisted upon previous managers. I think there was certain members of Brendan Rodgers' backroom team that he didn't choose, didn't do him any harm. Ronnie Dyla, I think, probably suffered a wee bit from that, to be honest. He couldn't properly stamp his authority and his kind of philosophy on that Celtic side as it happened. And then when Neil Lennon comes in, he doesn't choose his backroom team. No one knows what would have happened had he done so, but at least you live and die by your own kind of team and your own choices in that respect. Is it a big thing for you? And I know that people have said he doesn't care, but if he comes in and he doesn't rate John Kennedy, and I know loads of people do as a coach, and he doesn't rate Gavin Strachan, and 2 or 3 months down the line he wants rid of him, then it's even more upheaval. Yes. So surely that's a concern. It certainly is for me, Natasha.
It is, and I think something that Lennon said in that interview, which we'll come on to, is it works getting people appointed for you if they have your philosophy, your way of thinking, if it's all aligned. Even if you didn't choose them, it can work. The concern right now is that let's not kid ourselves. Postecoglou doesn't know John Kennedy. He doesn't know Gavin Strachan. He doesn't know what their football philosophy is. He doesn't know the way they work. So we're not going to find out that until we try it. If it doesn't work, then that's a concern. For me, it's very important that a manager gets to choose their own backroom team. We saw it, like we've just touched on with Neil Lennon first time round, when you got to bring in Parker, Mialby, Thompson. It did work better. You just saw it on the side of the pitch, it was better compared to Lennon working with Kennedy and Strachan. You just have to take those two images and look at which one was working better. Look at Brendan Rodgers with Chris Davies and his backroom team that he moves around with him because it works. When Dyla came in and got John Collins, again, someone he wouldn't have known, it didn't work greatly. So for me, it's really important to let the manager pick the people they get to work with. And saying that, obviously we saw the story break and then be quashed yesterday that Postecoglou wanted to bring in Kevin Muscat. We've also heard that that's not the case anymore, but it was interesting to see the outcry. So on one hand, you have the Celtic fans saying, we must let Postecoglou bring his own man in. And then the rumour that he said this is Kevin Muscat, and we say, oh no, not him though. So, I do get both sides of the argument there. We put a poll out on Twitter to ask for opinion. The end result for 4,000 votes, there was that 59% would have had no issue with Kevin Muscat. The rest would have had an issue with Kevin Muscat. Obviously a moot point now that we've heard it's not happening. But I think the fundamental principle there remains. We have to let Postecoglou bring in who he wants to bring in. We can't afford just to force Kennedy and Strachan on him and hope they do have the same philosophy and way of working. I want him to bring in his own people. If they have a massive rebuild ahead of them, as we know they do, if they've got to hit the ground running, if they've got this to get this squad gelled and bedded together very quickly, then he can't afford to also at the same time be trying to work with a new management team. You cut out half the battle if you're already there with your people and you know how they work. You can all work together to then sort of form the squad. So I think it cuts down on the sort of task at hand if we let him bring in his own people. But I think pretty certainly that Kennedy and Strachan will be involved in some way in the first league game of the season.
Interesting times indeed. A great point coming in from Stephen Ray. Before Ange lays out his plans, the club need to give the fans their vision for the next 3 to 5 years. Don Mackay needs to come out swinging or both will be dead men walking. And that leads us into the Dominic Mackay question, because I think what Stephen says here is what we would expect a big club to do. If I ask a Celtic supporter, a season ticket holder, even a shareholder, what is Celtic's vision for the next 3 to 5 years? Would they know? Would they know? Because at the moment, I keep going back to that old image from Wallace and Gromit with the dog and the train tracks are getting laid as the train goes along. That's Celtic at the moment. That's the Celtic boardroom. And I don't think the Celtic supporters know what is in store for the next 3 to 5 years. Where do they see us? I mean, it was interesting, Natasha, to hear that someone tried unsuccessfully to get a quote from Dermot Desmond. Well, he got a quote. He didn't get the quote he was wanting. Why do I need to answer questions about Celtic? Really?
Says it all.
And you think, well, that's contemptuous. That really is. And that will lead us on to the Neil Lennon interview as well. That level of contempt for the Celtic support. Now, again, I am all for, there's always been a rebellious aspect to supporting Celtic. The Celtic support have got it. And, the revolutionary aspect and all this kind of thing, which I think is an attractive element of the club, without a shadow of a doubt. And you think that when you're hearing that kind of narrative coming out of Celtic, you wonder yourself if we can ever repair the damage. It's going to take a very strong personality, but someone who's also strong-minded in terms of his own business philosophy to turn this one round. Now, I do have I'm going to reserve kind of criticism for Dominic Mackay. I don't agree with the banner yesterday. Someone suggested on Twitter it should have been my face on it. I don't think I'm that important, to be fair, but I don't think Dominic Mackay should have been on it. I really don't. I think that was a wee bit premature and a bit unfair due to the time that he's been in, and the fact that I think he is in a situation where he isn't calling the shots. When he is calling the shots, then obviously he can be judged. Now, Dominic Mackay coming in, you look at the nature of Dermot Desmond's response, the nature that we'll speak about of Neil Lennon's responses, and you ask yourself, is this going to come down to instilling a new culture at the club, and can Dominic Mackay do that when all the people he's working with behind the scenes are the same people who have instilled the previous culture?
I have a serious concern that the Celtic boardroom is full of replicas of Peter Lawwell, and that it's full of exactly the same type of character who all sit around feeding each other their own narrative, patting each other on the back for a job well done, and convincing themselves that they are superior, that they know what they're doing, that they are the best people for Celtic, and that the fans are disruptive, entitled, noisy, new breed supporters that they should heed no attention to because they know best. And as long as they keep that vacuum in the boardroom and they keep agreeing with each other and it keeps feeding on itself, I don't think one person in Dominic Mackay can come in and tear that up. I think it needs a significantly bigger shift in the makeup of the boardroom in terms of what we're seeing there. I don't think that'll happen. I think that is far too optimistic. What Mackay can do is try and get it turning in the right direction. He can try and start getting this back on track. At the moment, I feel there's an element of Mackay is being blamed for a car crash when he wasn't driving the car. He was sitting in the back seat of the car has crashed and he's getting the blame for it. I think we need to wait and see what he can do in the driver's seat. Let's see how he starts to turn this. Let's get it off the road it's on and something a bit better. We hear how good he is at fan engagement. Let's give him a chance to do it. Let's wait until he's in the role and let's see. If at that point, then we see no change, if the car is continuing to go off the same track, then we can criticise him. But until now, I think we need to reserve judgment, see what he's going to do, and hope for the best. Let's not be pessimistic. Let's not just assume that it's going to be more of the same. Let's not assume that Mackay is going to be another Peter Lawwell. I mean, let's be optimistic. Let's hope that he is going to bring something a bit different and is going to change the culture in that boardroom, and that we'll see a different culture within the club as a whole as well. So I'm optimistic. Maybe, that's me, but cautiously optimistic. I would qualify that with cautiously optimistic.
The big thing for me, Natasha, again, I think anybody who has been working in Celtic fan media, who has been producing content over the last year, probably has at some point been criticised for being too negative. And I always look at that situation and try to be as balanced as possible. And it would be easy for us to really go in hard on the negativity aspect of this, but I am looking at it from a scenario whereby I think that he is in the building, but I don't think his influence is going to be felt until the 1st of July, which is officially his first day as a CEO, and only then can you implement the changes. But the point you made about the boardroom is echoed by Celtic Rab 1967. The board are tired old men and one woman. Now I take that on board because I think that they need a freshening up of ideas. I think there's a lack of diversity there, to be fair. And, that isn't something that's going to happen overnight. That's going to take some time for that to be implemented in a boardroom. You don't sack the board, as used to be the chant. It's not something you can do, as we would scream at the cars coming in outside Celtic Park in the rain back in the old days. But I don't want to sound like a Celtic Natasha. But yeah, I'm really of the view that we need to give Dominic Mackay some time to get his feet under the table and to start implementing his ideas. I'm thinking of the positives, so I love the fact that Postecoglou is about developing youth. I think we need to get back to that. We've been shown up as being very, very short at the moment when regards to trying to bring in youth players. The one shining light at the moment, I guess, from our own academy has been Stephen Welsh, and I hope that he can develop. But we should, year on year, have 2 or 3 candidates for that, for that role to make the step in. Hopefully the Colts team will be something that's a permanent at Celtic and in Scottish football. We can start building that up. I also think that that's a way of progressing coaches, giving them a coach team, let them go there. And I know it's at a lower level, but it's a part of the progression within, Celtic's coaching, because I don't think we're always going to be in that. Yeah, there's no promotion this season, but this is a one-off. This is a trial season for the Colts. I would be pretty sure that when they look at the end of the season, the revenue, the potential broadcasting, maybe gate receipts, maybe sponsorship, that both coach teams bring to that league, they will make another proposal, but this time it will be, by the way, if we win the league, we want promoted. And, they'll look at the balance sheet and take it from there. So it could well be that we're in a situation where, some of the clubs are in Spain where they're playing second tier football in 5 years' time, Natasha. That could be the situation, and you get a coach to earn their spurs with the Colts before looking at whether or not they can take the step up to the first team. I'm excited about all of that side of thing, absolutely. And if Ange Postecoglou has got that youth buy-in, I'm all for that. When I look at Dominic Mackay, what I love about the prospect of Dominic Mackay coming in is fan engagement, actually listening to fans, and we know that there has been efforts to do that already, and I think that we'll see the full effect of that once Dominic Mackay comes in. People are saying, why has he not come out and addressed the fans? I think it will happen. I think it will definitely happen, and it will happen post 1st of July. There's been a few mentions today, Natasha, of Neil Lennon. You've not had an opportunity on Axom to talk about in detail, or talk about that interview. I'm going to call it that interview. What was your thoughts waking up and reading those words?
Disappointment. I was disappointed. One thing that I get asked a lot by people out with Celtic, not Celtic supporters, is that looking back on this, how will history look at Neil Lennon? How will the Celtic fans look back on him? Obviously this season has been disappointing, but let's talk 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. What is Neil Lennon's legacy at Celtic? And I said that I thought that over time it would be kinder to him. It would be kind to him. Neil Lennon achieved incredible amounts against adversity as a player and as a manager. At that time, he was, he was a supporter like us, and we could relate to him, and we supported him, and he supported us right back. And Neil Lennon was a Celtic legend. Did he tarnish his reputation with this season? Unfortunately, he did. He did tarnish it, because he will always be the man who's associated with losing the 10 in a row. And not only that, but not leaving when we all thought he should have. He seemed to cling on for his own sort of self-preservation for too long, and that did tarnish his reputation. What I thought that we could see happen is, over time, as the immediate hurt from losing the 10 not disappears, because I think this is something that will live with us all forever, but as over time it starts to repair slightly, I think history could have looked back on Neil Lennon in a fonder light. It would always be tainted by this 10 in a row season, but I think he would still have been remembered for all the good he did as a player and as a manager before this last year. For me, what that last interview did was almost irreparably tarnish his relationship with the Celtic fans. And the saddest thing for me is that when he did the interview, he knew that. There is no doubt to me that he didn't know, by saying those things, that he would permanently tarnish his reputation with the most of the Celtic fans. I'm not saying destroy it completely. There will still be that element there who think, who we will recognise what he achieved as a player. But no Celtic legend speaks about the fans the way he spoke about us in that interview. And for me, that's just really sad. It's sad that he did it. It's sad that he knew what would happen. And again, it's all about this self-preservation. He came out and did that to distance himself from this 10 in a row season. He came out and did that to point at all the other factors and say it wasn't because of me, it was because of the backroom team, it was because of COVID, it was because of the players, it was because of the fans. It wasn't him. And on the same interview, he's saying, but remember how good I was when we beat Lazio. That was me. The good things, they were me. The bad things, they weren't me. All he's doing in that is self-preservation to try and get himself another job. And what was at stake was his relationship with the Celtic fans, and he was willing to trade that. And for me, that's really sad, and that's really hard to come back from.
It's interesting, actually, that you've differentiated legacy and relationship, because I think instantly you're talking about, he's tarnishing a legacy. He's far more tarnished his relationship, I think, with the Celtic support, because I would struggle to find a player within recent history where Celtic fans, they looked at "We Are All Neil Lennon," that whole attitude behind the fact that he was being targeted for a very specific reason. Not because he was a particularly successful player and manager at Celtic. We know why he was being targeted by certain areas of society and the media, and we know that. And, the Celtic fans bought into Neil Lennon. They bought into him. And even when things were bad, as they were at times in the first spell as manager, people will remember that as well. There was always a huge amount of support for Lenny because of what he had gone through to represent Celtic. And that, I think, is something that was almost like a force field around Neil Lennon for a long, long time. And we felt it on the podcast because every time we criticised him, when the things started to unravel this season, we started criticising Neil Lennon, the amount of vitriol we got for that. And you realise this man has got some incredible support behind him in the Celtic fan base, of which we are all members. But I think you're right, the comments that he made were so... cutting and contemptuous again, Natasha, that'll be hard for him to come back from. And I just look at the 9-in-a-row era. There were 3 managers involved in that. Neil Lennon, Ronnie Deila, Brendan Rodgers. And all I've heard from Ronnie and Brendan is good things about the Celtic support. Now, the one guy out of the 3 who Celtic should mean more to is Neil Lennon. By all accounts, because he's been the player who came into the ground in 2000. But when you're starting to, say about Celtic fans that there's a new breed, and I think he includes the podcasters in that, those ones who, you can't silence, because we're not here spreading hate-filled concepts around any individual or group of people. We're here just voicing opinions. And our opinion was that it wasn't good enough, and he wasn't a good enough leader, and he should have gone. But, again, with all of this at play, I've always got to try and look at this in a balanced way. And I'm looking at 3 different aspects here. I'm looking at the situation after Dubai, where he's come out to a packed press room and basically gone off on one. I mean, I don't actually know, and I mean this, I don't know how much of that has been aired, because I've got the actual full, 16-minute video. And I know that people were looking at transcripts saying, when you look at the words, it's not as bad. You've got to look at the whole thing as a collective. The way it was delivered, the demeanour, he was attacking, he was swinging. So that's one incident. I think the one after that, and we did a broadcast, sticking up for Neil Lennon, because we felt it was unfair of anybody, and it was an invasion of privacy for anybody to film someone in their spare time to try and mock them and spread this narrative around his professionalism and his state and his mental state and physical state and all this kind of stuff. And we stood up for Lennon. But I think that's another incident and another indication of where Neil Lennon is at this moment in time. And I think the third one is probably this interview that he's given with the Times. So very, very defensive. He's coming out swinging, but on the flip side, I'm always reluctant to go and studs up on anybody who might actually be suffering as well. And sometimes that can manifest itself in coming out fighting and blaming other people and failing to take responsibility. So I think it was very unfortunate, and I think in time there are certain aspects of that that Neil Lennon might look back on and say, I regret that. And I think that, he will inevitably meet a great number of Celtic fans in the future, and his view may be different at that stage. But yes, he needs to get back into football, or he certainly wants to. I don't know if he needs to, but he wants to get back into football. And I know and understand the PR around this. Let's look at the positives of Neil Lennon, because it's a brand and he's going to be applying for jobs. But yeah, very disappointing, Natasha, and I share your disappointment in that. Yeah, positivity. Let's hope that this bus that you've just got on is one that gives us plenty of positives. At the end of the day, when we look at the next season, at the end of that, will it be any worse than the season we've just watched? It's going to go some distance to be worse, let's be honest, right? Is he the guy that I expected to be in charge? No, he's not. He's absolutely not. But then again, I look at, and Peter, and I'm not comparing the two of them, but who was the last manager that knocked Celtic back? And I think there might be others that we're unaware of. It was probably Owen Coyle. Remember Owen Coyle? And he agreed to take the Celtic job verbally. And by the way, Ange is only a verbal agreement at the moment. He agreed to take the job. He slept on it, and then he contacted Dermot Desmond the following day, and he didn't take it because he felt as though there was unfinished business down south. That was when his stock was at its highest. He's now managing in India. He has got Ross County. He's been sacked by Ross County. All I'm saying is your stock's there, and if you don't take the Celtic job, the chance might never come back. Eddie Howe, you've been warned. Let's see what happens to Eddie Howe next season. Wish him all the best, but we won't come calling again, I don't think, Natasha.
No, I don't think so either. And maybe I'm being slightly bitter here. Do I wish him all the best? I'm not sure that I do. Someone who's strung us along for 3 months waiting for what he thinks is a better opportunity. Do I wish him all the best? Maybe one day I might, but not right now.
Maybe if we see him up at Dingwall, managing Ross County, as Owen Coyle had to do. So we'll see how that one goes. Quick hour, as always, Natasha. Got to say, Lawrence is normally with us on a Tuesday, but Lawrence couldn't make it today. And we'll see how the lineup looks next Tuesday. But thanks everybody for getting involved on YouTube, Facebook, on Twitter. And thank you to Natasha Meikle for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.